Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Klaas Kuitenbrouwer. I'm a researcher at Het Nieuwe Instituut and the initiator of the zoöp project. And I'm here to basically talk you through the moving parts of the zoöp approach, and then more specifically on the notion of the life world that features kind of prominently in the zoöp's approach. So, zoöp for more life. This I already said. This is not new. Everybody knows this, but it helps to just set the frame a bit. It's not looking good. I'm talking about the climate crisis, obviously. The one, let's say, often taken road into discussing these things is the question of the nature-culture divide. So somehow, probably around 2,000 years ago, maybe even 2,500 years ago, in ancient Greece, this idea emerged that we can split between the world of matter and the world of mind. That these are actually two different worlds. Somehow, through Neoplatonism, Christianity, Enlightenment, science, early capitalism, neoliberalism, etc., this idea became codified and recodified and recodified, and it has led us to the situation we're in now. That humans are the ones that are entitled to the world, and that the rest of the world, the objects, the non-humans, are dumb and best kind of usable resources, and at worst, basically, extractable resources, there to satisfy the needs of some humans only. Okay, that's the sketch of the problem. Now, to get out of this, you can start this philosophical discussion about the nature-culture divide, and then somehow you always end up in a situation where you can either, everybody believes, okay, so humans are actually part of nature, but then what? Then how does that talk to our actions? Then and then you make this moral shift, and suddenly human actions become natural, and then you have a whole other kind of quagmire of issues to solve. So it doesn't really, this discussion is interesting to follow, but it doesn't move anywhere. So in a way, we started there as well, but we abandoned it entirely and basically use ecology as the frame. And this proved to be a very helpful choice. So in ecology, in ecological logic, all bodies participate. So we are all, as we are here, participating in ecologies. We breathe, we excrete a little bit of, how's it called? Transpiration, sorry. The bodies, the building here is protecting itself from the weather, but it's also participating in processes. It excretes a little bit of chemicals, but it holds certain life forms out, and it's open to other life forms. So basically, all bodies participate in ecologies, and all bodies in ecologies depend on each other for their own existence in a myriad of ways. So this starting point provides let's say, the conceptual first move of zoöp. In the situation we're in, it's clear sustainability is clearly let's say, a lost cause. It's really no longer, even if you imagine that all emissions, CO2 emissions would move to zero from tomorrow onwards, then still everything that's in the atmosphere would cause global warming at almost, it wouldn't make a dent in this process. So let's say sustainability, if it's understood as kind of isolating human processes, human economic processes, isolating them from the living world, is not going to cut it. We need to, in a way, that's then the consequence of this choice for ecology, we need to fully embrace our participation in ecology and then learn how to do this in a way that is no longer, let's say, that no longer has this kind of necrotic effect, that no longer basically causes death all around human activity. So, in other words, the challenge of, let's say, the grand challenge is to learn to become a useful species again, to learn to become basically symbiotic with the ecosystems we're participating in. So, you can all, let's say, we could probably agree that this would be, in general, a good idea, but then the question is how? And then we're again stuck with all this logic, this financial, political, economic, technical logic of the separation of the non-human world that we only know through numbers, but you can only quantify. We cannot supposedly really access because there's no subjects there, and only humans are subjects. So we're in a way stuck with the same problem. Okay, zoöp is then designed as a way to make a practical kind of inroad in this question. So the grand narrative is a bit like this. Right now, the, let's say, dominant logic is that ecology is understood as a set of relations which is a subset of the grander and most important set of relations known as economy. And this is kind of demonstrated by the approach of, for instance, ecological services. You know, where this is also the United Nations tries to do this. When they calculate the financial value of a forest or a river. So a forest cleans so much air, it sequesters so much CO2, it produces so much organic life in the soil. Altogether, this has a value of so many euros. So that allows a forest to be taken into account in the profit accountability, profit counting of basically in the economic models. The problem with this is, and it's not hard to spot, is that as soon as you attach this euro value to the forest, it becomes exchangeable. And then it becomes exchangeable with something else with the equal value. And the point is that this forest wasn't exchangeable to begin with. The effort was to calculate the value, to articulate the value in such a way that it would protect the forest. But what you've done by attaching a euro value or dollar value to it is you've done the exact opposite. So that's the problem with this model. Basically, ecology cannot be seen as a subset of economy because we're down the same road that we're in. So first thing is to turn this around and then understand, I've already said this, that economy is a set of relations within a larger ecology. It's also a problematic set of relations and it needs to be transformed. So where should we go? Well, then this is the image, more or less. So it's a low resolution, sweeping statement, but where we need to go is an economy that actually sustains all life. An economy that's not separated, a human economy that's not separated from the living world, but it's a fully participating set of members of it, and it is not, does not no longer have these degenerative effects. It becomes a regenerative economy or a human inclusive ecosystem. So this is the grand picture. So, how to get from here to there? Let's say I can't prove this works. We've only, in a way, just started, but it's very promising. Zoop is short for zooperation, cooperation with zoe. Zoe being the Greek word for life. Life in general, not just animals, not fauna, but life in general, in the most fundamental sense. Everything that is alive is the zoe. So it's collaboration with life, basically. In a nutshell, it's an organization model that any organization can adopt, this regardless of the kind of legal structure you have, that takes the interests of the zoe, of other than human life, into account in organizational decision making. I will get into how that works. So it takes it into account, and by becoming a zoop, you also commit to this goal in that larger narrative to become a symbiotic body in the ecosystems you participate in. This is not we don't know how this looks yet. We can say that this is the goal. We can probably recognize the situations in which it's clearly not a symbiotic body. And we can say something about, okay, this looks like a regenerative, but other than that, nobody can see further than this yet. We don't really know how this should work. So what we need to do is to learn. So zoop is is an organization model and a learning process to become symbiotic. There you go. And if there are many zoops, and I'll tell you how many there are in the end of the presentation, and this also becomes a fantastic base for collaboration, where different zoops deal with different problems, exchange knowledge, and help each other around the difficult issues, maybe form chains in the economy so that, let's say, a building company can get the materials from a zoop, that have the housing corporations that build these buildings are also a zoop, so that after these buildings are built, also the interests of other than human life are protected. So then we had, let's say, value chain by value chain, you might begin to see a picture of how an economy might transform for its current logic to a regenerative one. Okay, so on the scale of the organization, the grand narrative looks a bit like this. This is the current, let's say, dominant logic. Most people think ecology is elsewhere. It only belongs to non-humans. This is us, and it's a bit like ecology is identified with nature. It's there, it's not us. So the first move is this. Yes, we are in the middle of it. We're participating in it. We're not yet a zoop. And then the moment you become a zoop is the moment you incorporate the interests of the other than human life in the core of your decision-making process. So it's not a sustainability officer that answers to the boss, that has a limited budget and enormous ambitions that are never fulfilled because actually profit is always more important. But it's a way to transform the vision of the organization itself, to enter it into the decision-making process. So it enters on, in a way, decision-making level, whether that is the board or the jaarvergadering, the yearly meeting of all members. There's any body can become a zoop. Okay. How does this? Sorry, let me put this away because this will make a lot of sound, because I tend to move a bit. This model in practice is somebody that we call a speaker for the living gets the task of being a board observer. I'll tell you more about who these people are and what they can do, and how we are kind of working on creating more of them. Basically, it's a person that has the task, only one task, and that is to represent the interests of other than human life within the operational sphere of the zoop. So they have no other task. So Het Nieuwe Instituut is a zoop. Our speaker for the living is not concerned with making exhibitions or creating public programs. Her task is with everything we do to make sure that these interests are taken into account. So no matter if it's an exhibition or a public program or a waste stream or a new like a hardware set, I don't know, whatever. So her job is not the core practice of the organization, but her job is to protect whatever we do to make sure that these interests are taken into account. So you could see that this could lead to conflicts of interest if this person was directly paid by the organization. Because for this to happen, this person needs to have quite a strong mandate. Has to have the space to also say painful things and to make sure that these things are just not ignored, but a structure that actually allows the organization or facilitates the organization to work with this advice. So for this, we set up a separate legal body, the Zoonomic Foundation, which acts only as the safeguard for the independence for the speaker for the living. Basically, a speaker for the living always receives her assignment from the Zoonomic Foundation. It's a bit technical, it's interesting, but it's not what we're here for, so I won't say more about this today. Who gets up to take this role is decided by the zoop together with the Zoonomic Foundation. So there's several people that we're training right now, actually not right now yet, but we know who they are. In the coming months, that means there will be 5 more, and that all could do 1 or more zoops. So we would be ready to set up 15 more zoops in the end of this year and next year. So this role has kind of 2 main sources of inspiration. The way to do this. One is the way in how in New Zealand is famous. And there are 3 non-human collective bodies: Wanganui River, Mount Taranaki, and Te Urewera National Forest, National Park. They have been granted legal personhood. So they are, for the law, they are identical to a human being or to a company. They have their own rights, and these rights cannot be violated, and they can be protected in court by the body themselves, in this case, the river themselves. So the actual speaking on behalf of the river cannot be done by the river. I mean, there are people that understand the river, but usually these people are not around in courts. So this is a special task, and this special task is taken up by what is known as a guardian. So this is a representative of the Maori people that live with this river, for whom this river is their living ancestor. Usually somebody that also has a special affinity with this river. So it's somebody that knows what this river actually needs and wants, like what it consists of, how it flows, how it behaves, what its history is, what it used to do, etc., etc. So this is a person that takes up this role. So this, you can see the speaker for the living kind of deriving its logic from this role. So the other one is the let's say Western, or you could say global economy. It's not necessarily Western, it's definitely global. The global economy's logic of the startup sphere, where sometimes investors that like, okay, you have a very good idea and I'm willing to invest in your operation, but I also want to make sure that you do what is in my interest. So for this I will send a board observer to your startup. This is not a full board member, doesn't have voting rights, but it's somebody who sits in these processes, has a certain set of themes on which it can advise, and you better listen to this person because they are backed by our investment. So otherwise we have something to talk about. So this logic, so in a way, is the let's say the business logic or the organizational logic, the legal logic that we adopted to use this role of the speaker for the living. So in a way, using this as a metaphor, you could say that the living world is treated as a body of investors that for thousands of years has freely and generously made companies exist and helped them to make profit, and is finally kind of demanding some kind of return. Like, listen, we have interests, these interests need to be met. It's not just us giving and you doing whatever you like. Okay. In practice, the speaker for a living is not on their own. It has a whole network. Other speakers, they help each other, but there's also a whole network of experts that may help with all kinds of detailed or little questions. That, I mean, you cannot know everything of all organizations. So there's a whole network of people that help in practice with the work, but accountable. The role of accountability is kind of this person, speaker for the living. Okay. Now. With this person on board, you could still think, or you could imagine that this still goes in many different directions. A zoöp commits to a learning process, this learning process of becoming symbiotic. And this, in order to be able to do this, you need to know a lot of things about how you participate in ecologies, how you participate in ecosystems, how you are a member of it already, how you're participating, sorry I said that, and then what you need to change, basically. So this is I'll skip these a bit, I can come back to it. This is basically the diagrammatic version, so it's not very informative. It comes down to the following, that a zoöp, year by year, reads its own ecological integrity, which is a word that comes from nature protection. We use it in a slightly different way, because there's no original historic reference frame to the ecological integrity of a zoöp. There's no fully fledged whole and pure ecosystem that acts as the reference frame for zoonomic integrity in a zoöp. It's more open-ended and process-oriented. Anyway, a zoöp works towards its own ecological integrity in a kind of yearly process by reading its current state of relations, whatever the relations that the zoöp has with its surroundings, internal, material, chemical, symbolic, political, technical, financial, etc. Tries to understand which of these relations are regenerative, so basically support life in many different places. And which of them aren't, so which are degenerative, which ultimately lead to a kind of disbalance on the long term or the short term. And then the job is to replace those degenerative relations by regenerative ones, step by step, year by year. So it comes down to this. First question is, the first three are basic ecological questions. These are questions that ecologists ask of ecosystems. the unique bit or the specific bit of zoops is that it's not only asked of ecosystems understood as this non-humans only, but it's an ecosystem that actually includes humans and includes buildings and cars and technical infrastructures, etc. So the first question is what bodies form the zoop? So, and then this is important. It's a little bit of a side note, but it helps to get you through all these questions in an important way. All these bodies are understood as collective bodies. So there's not such a thing as a pure individual, not a human nor a non-human. A building is a collective body of stones and ducts and facades and roofs, etc. A human consists of a lot of non-humans. At least 1.5 kilo of bacteria resides in the human body. And actually every cell itself is already a collective, because the mitochondria turn out to be actually historically other bacteria. So anyway, this goes down to the level of the atom and up to the way of the level of the cosmos. So this helps to be able to see different kinds of relations existing simultaneously with different aspects of a body. It really opens up, it makes your thinking a lot more flexible to basically treat all bodies. You can get rid of a lot of dichotomies that otherwise kind of impair your thinking. So it's a helpful tool. So once you have made, I'll go through a bit of examples later. Once you've identified what bodies form the zoop, you can ask yourself the second question: what are their life worlds? And this is the thing we're going to talk about a bit more. So life worlds is a term originally, it's Umwelt originally by Jacob van Uxküll, a famous Estonian ecologist of the beginning of the first half of the 20th century. Life world basically means the sensory capacities of an organism and the way the sensory capacities mediate the world. So basically the life world of a being is the kind of this version of reality that this being can registers as real, registers as this is the world. And this obviously follows the logic, or this is structured in a way by your sensory capacities. Like if I don't have eyes, I'm not insensitive to light, then my world is not, my reality is not visual, but has a different structure. So the famous example is that of the tick. It's also picked up by Deleuze and Guattari. But the tick, this tiny little bug, basically senses humidity, gravity, and a little bit of temperature, and it will, in its life cycle, to the extent that we can know it, comes down to coming out of the egg, climbing up a plant in its neighborhood and waiting around at a space around 2 meter height, and then waiting there until specific conditions consisting of a certain type of humidity, a certain type of vibration and a certain type of temperature are met. Then it drops, and usually this means that it will fall onto the skin of a mammal, where it will grub in, lay eggs, and out of the eggs come new ticks, and the cycle repeats. So the life world of a tick is quite different than that of a human. So it's not visual, it's a little bit audible, but has slow frequencies. It basically senses temperature, and together these senses make up the reality of a tick. There is nothing else that even exists for a tick, nothing else also that matters. So it's important that these life worlds have actually 2 dimensions. And we'll get to that also in the conversation about XR. So there's this sensory capacity that is basically what is possible as a touch point between this body and the world. What exists as a let's say, a vector for communication. But the other level is that of the meaningful signal. What makes this body move? So this meaningful signal for the tick is this synthesis of pressure, vibration, humidity, and maybe some chemical traces. This is the thing that makes it move. So there's a lot of other things that happen but are not meaningful for the tick, right? Day and night cycles may not be important. I don't know, there's a whole lot of things that you could see are real also for the world of the tick, but they don't matter for the tick. So there's sensory capacity is one thing, and then the meaningful signal is another layer. So, third question, back to the zoop. Third question of zoops is then these first two come down to a kind of mapping. So what exists here and what are their possible connections. The third question is then to figure out what are their relations. So how do they relate? So, and are these relations supportive, regenerative, or are they degenerative, or can we not see any relation at all? So this gives you a kind of diagnosis. This gives you your, let's say, the state of affairs. So at this moment, our lights in the parking lot basically mean that the bats and the insects don't like it here at night. So, Or our rainwater collection actually feeds a whole patch of land, which is a very good idea. So by accident we put, or the absence of a rain container helps this water flow, the rain flow through a certain piece of the garden, which turns out to be really helpful. So let's not do anything about this. So this relational mapping is the third stage, and this gives you your, let's say, your problem sphere. On the basis of this, you can say, okay, this is a problem, this is working, and then you have to choose. So what are we going to work on this year, and then you execute the changes that you need to execute in order to change those relations. You either remove the light or turn them off, or you put up a rain container, or you do not use this material anymore, or you try to invoke a different kind of policy making on the municipality, or all kinds of things may be part of this zoöp approach. So to expand this, because this is in a way the key bit, this is also the how, let's say, this is why I'm here. This is the bit that talks to extended realities. So this is a way to unpack these questions. So in the first question, like what bodies form the zoöp? At least 4 different kind of clusters are important, and there's always the very important cluster of other bodies that don't belong to any of the other. So the more than human bodies, which are either alive or abiotic. Rainwater is clearly a non-living but still important more than human body. Soil life, trees, worms, bats, badgers, rabbits. So badgers. Okay, I'll talk about the life of the zoöp Het Nieuwe Instituut, which I know best, of course. So there's no badgers, forget the badgers, but there's bats, rabbits, worms, ducks, Nile geese, willows, a thorn apple, cherry tomatoes, grasses, rainwater, a whole range of rare water plants. There's now several fish in the ponds. There's the building, more than human bodies, organizational bodies. These are let's say, the human bodies that have practical effect on the ground. So this would be the financial team, the production teams, the board, all these units that have a say and whose decisions make a difference in the operations of the zoöp. And then there are legal bodies, which tend to be on the outside a little bit. So there are contracts, there's municipal rules, there's the environmental law, there's the fact that the ground is owned by the municipality, but that we are maintaining it. There's the contract partner of the cafe, which has special rights that are just laid down in the contract. So it's not just up for us to decide fully what this cafe does. They have their own agency. All these things are legal bodies. They form the zoöp also. Human artifacts like the buildings, the parking lot, the lighting, the digital systems, the locks, the keys, the what have you. And then other bodies. And in our case, very important here is the audiences are, in a way, publics and different participating groups. So, sensing, listening, basically this question of live worlds. So, these are all, let's say, different, in a way, sensory capacities for the different bodies. So, chemical, let's say, earthworms have have many more, but certainly also a chemical life world. The plant roots also, let's say, relate to their surrounding in chemical exchange. They pick up phosphorus and they exchange nitrogen and CO2 with the ground, etc. The financial life world is very strong, of course, in the financial team that basically excludes all other kind of sensory input and basically only reads its surrounding through its Excel sheets and through its financial flows. So in a way, you can say that the sensory capacity of the financial team is it's only financial. This is how they register their world. Visual, well, some bodies only, or like the tick has a haptic, clearly a haptic, a touch-based life world, and fishes do this as well. For instance, fishes in the pond, the senses of fishes are next to chemical and vision. They're also very much kind of sensing pressure through their skins. They have this fantastic ability. So we can translate this talk to our topic also. We could translate this into sound, but the actual way a fish understands vibrations in the water as a kind of registering of its space, we don't have a real equivalent for. So we don't know how this works. We know that it works like this, but we don't know what it is like to be a fish. We can imagine what it is through kind of translating it to other sensory kind of sensory input that we can work with, but it's not something that we have. Yeah, thanks. So we'll talk more about that. Characterizing is this degenerative, regenerative, or no relations. Yeah, that's another 5, right? No. Important to realize is that, of course, human artifacts also have life worlds and also need maintenance and habitat and energy to exist and register their surroundings in different ways. Maybe not in the same way as a human body does or as a tree does, but definitely a building responds to its surroundings, has chemical exchanges with the atmosphere and slowly erodes and needs maintenance in order to exist, or otherwise slowly responds to pressures from outside and crumbles. Okay, then focusing, it's clear what are then the important things that we need to do. As for instance, at zoöp, Het Nieuwe Instituut, do we need to build our participatory community and expand this zoöp notion over the sphere of Rotterdam? Should we? Sorry, riverbanks is from another example. Should we stop using certain materials? Stop using aeroplanes and all? Whatever is we feel is most urgent and is within our capacity, and then then we have to. If we make this plan, then it's up to us to actually execute it. So this is the last important slide. We found that these interventions actually typically they tend to come in 3 flavors. So one of them has to do with sensitizing, and this is the condition on which everything depends. That's basically the condition, and here again, I'm stressing this because it, I think, relates to XR, the topic. It's opening up to the possibility of horizontal relations, opening up to the possibility of collaboration, opening up to the idea that it's not for us to decide what non-humans want, but it's up for us to listen and to figure out how they act and to kind of enter a dialogue with this. So in a way you could say this is developing an ecocentric sensibility. Okay, once that is in place or is kind of lighting up, this is sometimes a slow process, but once you start, you cannot go back. This is the good thing. It only goes in one direction. Then you can start to reorganize your immediate surrounding, understand what you need to do, begin to feel your way around, like, okay, but for the badger, sorry, forget about that badger. For the hedgehog here, that's a hedgehog. For the hedgehog here, actually, these worms are very tasty, very interesting. So maybe I can accommodate the hedgehog a bit better. That this becomes a normal attitude and not an exotic idea. And this has to do with your own sphere of action in a way. What you can what you have agency over. Put it this way. And then the last set of relations, the last set of interventions, have to do with how you do with your surroundings, with let's say the bodies who are not sensitized. So how do you, in a way, protect your own zoöp from the logic, this degenerative logic from the outside world that has all kinds of demands that do not fit your own logic anymore? Or the other way around, how do you transport and basically influence your surroundings by exporting your own values? I have a nice example for that from Het Nieuwe Instituut, but I'll leave it for the questions. This is the basic image then, how a zoöp movement would be formed. So the Zoonomic Foundation delegates speakers for the living that organizations that begin to realize they participate in ecosystems become ready to become a zoop at some moment, decide to include a speaker for the living and then become part of the zoop movement. The Zoonomic Institute, that would be me and Wietske and Merel and Zoe, and we basically help other organizations to become zoops. We are now at one fully functioning zoop, Het Nieuwe Instituut. 3 more are confirmed for November. Bodemzicht, De Keuvel, and a project, a building company from the middle of the country that I cannot reveal the name from yet, but hopefully tomorrow, because I'm speaking with them. I know what they want, but I only want to say this when it's really kind of a done deal and it's fully confirmed. In 2024, 7 European port cities will become zoops because we're part of a big European project. And in 2025, we hope to grow further. And this is not scaling up, to be precise, this is spreading. Scaling up is a logic that does not fit ecological logics. If you want to register to the newsletter, go to zoop.hetnieuweinstituut.nl. And we're in transition from an old website to a new, so this may not work. If you cannot find it, then just send a mail to info@zoop.earth. Yeah, and then I have, a lot of, let's say, credits. Also, this only half, it gets unreadable if I include everybody. But this is kind of the area that we're talking about. So, sources for ecology and kind of flat ontologies. A lot of familiar names, I'm sure, and maybe hopefully some new ones as well. New materialisms is very important. This is this area of the life world, this other than human subjectivities, in ecological terms known as biosemiotics. This is also very important, let's say, post-human knowledge practice. And of course, this whole thing resides in a logic of degrowth. I don't know if you saw it, but yesterday, Matthias Schmelzer, one of the authors of the book The Future is Degrowth, spoke in the Dutch parliament and gave them, did his best. I'm not sure if it landed, but he was fantastic. Okay, that's me.
Okay, so we prepared a couple of questions and then it's time for the Q&A. So the first question is there a difference between live worlds and virtual worlds?
I think they're quite different things, a virtual world, the way we understand it now, is a kind of, let's say, limited version of the sensory capacity of a human. It talks to ears and eyes only. It also is usually built to be consumed through specific, or participated in through specific gear. It has nothing to do with what a tick experiences. Like, it doesn't have vision, it doesn't have ears. There's no VR glasses that would fit the world of a tick, let alone the hedgehog or the badger. So a live world is, a virtual world, I think, is, you could say, is somewhat an extension of the human live world, but it's not a general term for a live world, no. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So, do you think XR technologies can be an opportunity to facilitate a live world in which the needs of other than human life forms are more articulated or amplified?
Yeah, I think I need to kind of rephrase that a bit. I think, if I understand it correct, the question is, can XR technologies translate non-human life worlds so that humans can relate to them? Does that make sense? That's I think what you're getting at.
Well, or vice versa as well. So, like, for trees to also sense the stock market or something, I think that could also be an opportunity for such a thing. But I think this one-way stream would be more easy, maybe?
Yeah, I think we have to go back to this difference between the sensory capacity and the meaningful signal here. Yes. So, yes, you can translate, I guess, the stock market values to concentrations of phosphorus in the soil. But that doesn't mean that the tree registers the stock market. The stock market itself does not provide any meaningful signals. Phosphorus may, but so You see what I'm driving at? Yeah,
I understand.
and the other way around as well. So this is also the difficulty. It's like, you can translate between sensory capacities, but the translation between of those meaningful signals is way harder. I mean, we're wired as mammals, so you have this chasing habit, this fleeing habit, and the carrying habit, roughly. There's a lot more, but in basic, let's say, behavioral patterns, that's about it. And if you're not a mammal, then carrying is not there. But we tend, for instance, the famous book by, what's his name, Wolleben, about the secret life of trees. And it kind of mobilizes this mammalian sense of caring. It talks to humans in the way like, so trees care for their children as well. Trees are not mammals. So yes, they may care for their children. Actually, it turns out that there's this mycelia network that maybe is actually, can be understood as a stock exchange, funny enough. But it's not that they care for children the way mammals do. So it's a translation, but it's also a little bit what is actually the life world of this tree in relation to its children is not fully clear. We don't know. And we do know that it's probably not the same as for a mammal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you know where I'm... Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. So, so there must be a bridge, right? From this experience of the tree to the human life. So do you think there's a risk of life forms being lost in this translation into an avatar?
If you use XR.
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, like there must be a bridge. I'm not sure if XR is that bridge. I mean, there's many different bridges. I understand that we talk about XR, so let's go with that, no problem. But there's many ways to figure out what a tree feels, and there's actually people that have this sense. I mean, the human body turns out to be much more sensitive than we give it credit for, and like say the neocortex kind of limits also. Let's say the space of meaningful signals, and also this culture comes in and words come in. That certain we get a culture to a particular set of meaningful signals through our neocortexes, but actually our bodies are capable of much more. It's much more malleable, and if you cultivate another way of relating to the surrounding, like wichelroedelopers, this is most wichelroedelopers. This you call them rods. The people that do this, they say, I'm not talking to spirits or anything. It's just that I know that my body registers things, and I need this to amplify the signal. Otherwise, I won't register it. So it's a way to get around of the kind of the constraints of the neocortex. So a wichelroede is also a very valid bridge. It's maybe not what you're looking for, but
I see. But so you think like these sort of digital, sort of quantified technologies maybe actually withhold us from this connection, or?
I think there's ways to do it right, and there's definitely ways to expand the human-centric. I mean, that's what we've been, and that's not just XR. I mean, that's the telescope or the microscope, and that's what we have been doing for what is it, 500 years, to expand our sensory capacities. And I think XR is in this line and offers a new way of kind of synthesizing different signals into a more synthesized world, which is not just one narrow bandwidth signal, but actually has a fully expansive world. So I think that's fantastic. But I'm not sure if there is a risk of, you only put in XR what you know, and all these things you don't know never make it into the XR. So you never know what you leave out. So that's the risk. You never know what it's like for a bat, to talk with Thomas Nagel. You can imagine what it's actually like to be a bat for a bat, which is what we won't know. We can imagine what it's like for a bat as a human, but not as a bat.
Yeah.
So, and this is not the problem. This is, let's say, I think you have to accept that this is the fact. This is, we are humans. It's okay to be human.
We're constrained, by our human subjectivity, anyways.
Yeah, but it's also fantastic to be humans, because this neocortex does a couple of things that a lot of organisms, this just can't do. So the fact that you can use words and have ideas, and that these attune you to different kinds of realities, this extremely malleable, flexible organ in the brain. That's something that. So I would say this is our bridge, and then this is our most important bridge, and then maybe XR can help that, help the neocortex to cross that bridge, to make this imaginative leap. Right. I would say that's possible, but it's not a fully one-to-one translation of the life world of another being into, so that you know what's there. That's not what this is. No.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question is, what could be ways to empower non-human life digitally without reducing them to merely human-centered viewpoint? But do you think anthropomorphizing could be a way, for example?
I think there's no way around it. That's what that's said. Mammalian mode. That's how we do it. So there's always the risk, but there's also again, this is something to be accepted and then to take into account. I'm not sure. So whether you consciously have to do it is you do this anyway. When using language, we're already anthropomorphized because we don't use language in the ways other beings do.
But you're afraid of a sort of human hubris, then, that you really feel like, oh, I really understand what this tree is going through now because we created this anthropomorphized image.
So I think it's a fantastic ability that this is what art is about, basically. Yeah? Basically, allowing yourself to go to other, to enter other subjectivities. That's the also. So this, by all means, let's use it. But it's not the same as giving full access, and it's certainly also not necessarily the same as empowering other. It's basically, I would say, if anything, it's empowering humans a little bit. But I'm not sure if kind of opening access through XR empowers a tree. That's we don't know what this. You would have to first go somewhere else before you. I would first, figure out and know a lot more about these trees, which is it's a bit of an anecdote, if you allow me. This has to do a little bit with the way in our kind of medical history we understood the Western tradition. Human bodies have 5 senses and they have a body and a mind, right? In Asian traditions, the mind is also a sense, and there's also no difference between the body and the mind. It's more monist. There's this spiritual versus materiality is not a thing that sits in such a dichotomy in most Asian cosmologies. So it turns out, I don't know the word for it, but I got it from the book from Yuk Hui. There is a word for a capacity, which is in the Chinese way of doing medicine, a capacity of humans to resonate. They call this the ability to resonate. This has no translation. We think of senses as media between the mind and the body, in a way, something at the bridge, a bit like XR. In this idea of senses as media doesn't exist. They're all just channels. They're ways to enter other worlds. And next to our 5 senses, there's also the ability, and this is the mental, this is what the mind does, is to resonate. So you can just sit next to a plant and wait. And then if you sit long enough, you know a lot about this plant. And so I know this, I forgot his name, or it's a hard name to remember because it's Chinese and I don't speak Chinese, but he makes drawings, fantastically beautiful detailed drawings of plants that the kind of drawings that you would resemble to or compare to biological drawings by scientists in our botanic tradition. But he's not. He's an artist, but he really observes. He really kind of internally tries to resonate with this plant, and that's when he feels like he has built some kind of rapport. That's when he starts to draw, and he makes these beautiful drawings of these plants that reveal all kinds of detail. So, that's another. What I'm trying to say is that talking about senses and XR as kind of things that need to bridge something is maybe I would expand this notion. It's like let's help resonate. So there's no problem there. There's nothing to bridge. We basically share the world, but we can expand the way we relate to it.
Okay.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful answer. XR technologies are all developed and maintained by humans. Do you see a role of open source in opening up these technologies to non-human life forms?
You mean like non-human coders?
Yeah.
There's a long way from where we are now, huh? I mean, I don't think there's really any kind of coding language that is open. I mean, unless you account AIs, which I don't think is where we need to go here. I'm not sure if that's. It's asking a lot of the. Put it this way, it's asking a lot of I don't know, cows, or who do you have in mind? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
So open source, as I understand, is also maintained by humans. So there's not a different.
No.
I mean, there's different humans, but
I think it's like we can also ask open source versus these big tech companies, because you have like the Oculus, and that's of course owned by Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in a conference before the summer in Berlin, where a couple of it was not very good, but it was an interesting bunch of people, and there was also this massively rich Google researchers that have this, and they're all into the big foundation models like ChatGPT, the DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, these massively trained AIs that have the whole internet to train on, and then are able to answer really like not specific questions they're trained for, but basically anything, and they respond through their statistical patterns, and they are extremely excited about the possibility of translating whale into human languages. So they think, well, what if we basically record all whale song ever recorded, and just run it through a whole series of pattern recognition systems, and at some point where we identify like what signals respond to what circumstances, we'll be able to speak whale. So maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry. Actually, what I wanted to say is I forgot about this. I'll remember it maybe later. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to go now to the questions of the audience. There's a virtual audience here as well. So
Behind the camera, of course, yeah. Yeah.
Let's start there. What?
That's the quiet.
Oh, they're quiet. Oh, let's start with the physical audience. Yes.
Okay.
Shall I bring you the mic? Yeah.
Oh, where to start? Thank you for this presentation, Klaas. Maybe you remember, maybe you don't, but last year I was a part of a project with Ljubljana in Krater.
Yes, I know who you are.
Yeah. So, and I was wondering when you were going through those different steps and you're with sensitizing, and also related to technology, because I also work at V2, maybe you didn't know, but I'm a project manager there, so that's why I'm here. But in doing these sensitizing experiments and also thinking through, okay, so what kind of sensory equipment does this organism have, we as humans, others? For me, it can also sometimes still feel like it's a very instrumental approach, almost, in understanding how a different being functions. And of course, what we did with Krater, or at least the project that we were part of, is more like a guided meditation to get into a state, maybe something that corresponds to resonating, or what you said, you know, to bring yourself, your own being, in resonance with another being. And then I find this more than human XR interesting, because I think the question for me is, and I'm curious to know how you feel about it, is like what would be the intention of a tree, for instance, communicating with XR, VR? Because I think, to me that's also, I'm like, I don't even know if there would be an incentive because that comes from a very human perspective almost. But so I'm curious to know what your view on that is, and if you even see that is maybe also a human projection, or.
Yeah, I first got a kind of. An important moment for me was when I read this book, How Forests Think, by Eduardo Kohn. And he kind of Because in a way, a lot of the questions of communication, of let's say sharing experiences among species, is kind of predicated on the idea of communication being symbolic language, like what humans do, using words. Turns out a lot of mammals actually use symbolic language. That's a different matter. That's interesting, but not what I'm trying to talk about. But communicating doesn't happen only, also for humans, doesn't happen only through symbolic language. It's not just words and meaningful, let's say, constructions of codified signs. It's our physical resonances are also always part of this. You know this when, if I sit in a certain way, if I know that I don't want to listen to you, it's very hard for you to talk to me. And this is not because I say anything to you, but there's a set of choices that I make that make my body resonate in a different way than, okay. So, in semiotic terms, so symbolic language, indexical, that's like the direct material connection, like as a tree grows a seed, the seed falls on the ground, so the seed is there as a trace, it's cause there, and let's say it's also behavior, it's also an expression of this tree, but it's not like it intended anything or it willed. It's basically a direct physical, like causal relation. And then you have this in the middle, you have these iconic relations. There's this that work through similarities, like forget about this. Sorry, this is too far for now. The point is that we don't only talk in symbolic language, but in a lot of different, and if you include all those other realms of communication, then our shared world is a lot bigger. Then we're not looking for this, like what does tree want? Can it tell me what would it vote for? Would it actually vote for? Is it okay with the Partij voor de Dieren? Where should it be the plants or should it be the soil or right? So. The opening up of this space of communication, that everything already expresses itself, and some of this expression works through symbolic terms, symbolic language, but most expression actually uses other realms of signs, is really helpful. And then intention is indeed, then it becomes clear also that intention is a specific kind of codified way to talk about something that also belongs to a moving body. We have, if you have like a bipedal symmetry, then forward movement is the thing that comes natural to a body that has bipedal symmetry. If you have five arm symmetries, then it's like any movement. There's no one movement, so there's no. It's not. This idea of intention already is harder to situate in a body that has five arms, because it's. Or let alone 8 or no arms. So this I got from another book, it's also in the list, is Metazoa. So intention is a hard one, but that a tree has needs and that a tree kind of responds to opportunities in surrounding by making choices is clear. And these roots grow somewhere, not everywhere. And they like it there and they don't go there. And these are the phenomena that you can resonate with. And this is how you can learn what a tree wants. Like how does it respond to its circumstances? And this is how it talks, by doing what it does. And in a way, so if you bring this back to humans, this is what we do too. It's just that we don't grow roots, but we also talk. So our behavior happens in the symbolic realm, but it's not like more important or has this specific role. It's just one way of expressing. And then so turning that around helps you kind of opening up this question. Then it's easier to realize that you actually share a world. Part of our realities overlap, parts don't. All good, no problem. Fantastic that humans have the ability to speculate and to use this fantastic neocortex to a little bit enter the subjectivity of others to some extent. Probably more than trees can, we're not sure, but we don't know if trees can actually imagine what it's like to be a human. Probably not, but at least we know that humans can try to imagine what it's like to be a tree. Not that this is accurate, but it does allow for this, for another way of relating.
Okay, pass the microphone to any more questions. Hello. Hi, my name is Leo. Thanks for the presentation. I wanted also to
connect to the question that you had about more than human coders, non-human coders. There was this machine built in 1949 by Bill Phillips. You know, it was called Moniac. It was a water simulator. It was simulating the economy of the UK, right? It was a computer, except it was not using binary code. It was a more than binary machine. It was responding to it was basically this machine using sinks and tubes to simulate economical
processes.
Yeah, exactly. And so what strikes me about that example is also this, the words we use, basically, the simulator or computer. And like the other artists here in the room, we did a workshop in the past days in the City Garden in Rotterdam. And with this question that was, what can this City Garden teach us about realities in transition? About realities in transition, yep. The theme of the residency. And I kept on recurring on this use of metaphors we have to talk about technology and to talk about ecology as well. And you know how technology also borrows a lot of this ecological terms like the web, the cloud, bugs, viruses. So my question to you, because I see also this kind of paradigm shift, this use of ecological terms transposed into organizational models. What are the metaphors that we can use to generate, to accommodate more zoological technology, or rather than what, how do we use them? Because also there's harmful metaphors, like the cloud is not really...
Yeah, it depends on what you want to use that metaphor for. So, but I can tell you one anecdote. I'm not sure where I got it from. It's not my idea, but somebody told me this, but I forgot who it was. But it's, I think it was Bateson, actually, now that I think of it. Gregory Bateson. He didn't talk to me, but I read it in his book, of course. If you think of, if you, let's say, a lot of our economic logic is based on a kind of military logic. It's about hierarchies, it's divisions, it's operations, it's strategies, tactics. All these, and this is business speak. This is not. It's no coincidence that The Art of War is the most read book in management cycles. And it also it defaults around the center as the chain, as the origin of command, as the origin of action. It's the hierarchy. The center of an organization is where decisions are made and they're executed over the. This is the machinic logic also. If you look at a cell, and if you look with this mindset to a cell, and this is what a lot of people for a long time did, it means that the nucleus of the cell is the brain. The nucleus of the cell is where decisions are made and it's executed by the rest of the cell. But in fact, it turns out to be the exact opposite. It's the skin of a cell that acts, that mediates its surrounding, that is in touch, that basically forms the life world, that decides how the internal differs from the outside, that decides where to go, that basically everything that is intelligent about the cell is in the skin of the cell. And the nucleus is just the repository of successful behaviors. It's basically an archive. It's passive. And at some point it will kind of store behaviors in a certain way so that they become available for future generations. But most of the actual behaviors never make it to the nucleus. Well, that's one. Yeah,
that's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah. And I think this another way I sometimes talk about zoöp. Of course, it was a lot of the development time was in COVID, but the fact that you, let's say, attach this little code of behavior to the core of an organization, basically you're looking at this, adopting this metaphor, but then to a zoöp. So a zoöp is also look at it as a cell. Then this attaching this code basically adds a couple of behavioral possibilities to an organization that becomes. Its actual intelligence is not developed in the core, but is developed in the actions. But that through the fact that we have this speaker for the living attached to the core of the organization, it becomes something that can also be absorbed in the organization. These lessons make sure that they actually... So in a very specific way, you could say that this acts like a virus, but then not like a, let's say, a harmful virus, but like a beneficial virus. A virus that actually allows certain new set of behaviors to become archived in the organization.
Yeah.
So,
But it spreads.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Any further questions? Any questions from online? Perhaps. Maybe I can take this opportunity to ask a question myself. I was wondering what happens when there's a conflict of interest. So,
between?
let's say that you have a particular ecological sphere with many diverse organisms.
Yeah,
and
like always, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I could imagine there's a case where it might be in the interest of one species or one type of organism to perform a certain action within that ecology that is not in the interest or maybe even in the disinterest of some of the other organisms. So how do you arbitrate between that?
Yeah, this is in a way where the collective bodies idea also comes in. And there's two dimensions to the question. One is the, let's say, the body versus species. So, and what if the hedgehog eats the worm? It's not in the interest of the worm to be eaten by the hedgehog, but how do we interfere? Well, first of all, as a zoop, it's not the point to decide what everybody does. It's to give space to choices. The whole point is to kind of step back a little bit. So this hedgehog is allowed to make choices. We don't have to confine a space to the hedgehog. This is not the point of a zoop. So your job is more to create space than to dictate what happens. That's one thing. The other thing is that, so on the level of the body of the hedgehog and the body of the earthworm, clearly the hedgehog benefits and the earthworm doesn't. But if you expand this notion and look at all other bodies involved, then the fact that this hedgehog can exist and that it provides all kinds of other services and has all kinds of other beneficial relations to its surroundings, and it's maintained by eating, or is kind of kept in shape by eating earthworms, and that together this hedgehog and this earthworm perform a certain set of relations that make it possible for yet other life to exist, then so basically what I'm trying to say is that at some point this degenerative effect on the individual earthworm disappears from the picture. And then you cannot find, so that's when you know that we're actually not talking of a degenerative relation. Because if you do this kind of exercise and you include, I don't know, waste streams in a river from a factory, this waste stream, at no point does it turn into something that's regenerative. At no point it becomes something that is actually beneficial for the whole web of relations. So this is always the question. So you never know at what relation not at first. You never know if you're looking at the right relation. So you have to. This is where the collective bodies logic really comes in helpful. You can always expand and go down at different scales.
You have to really look at the network.
You have to look at the network. It's never so. Let's say the question of the hedgehog and the earthworm is also is a translation of a human individual rights problem. So doesn't the earthworm also have a right to a meaningful existence? Yes, it does. But okay, this is also where human rights kind of fail to do the job of let's say the public sphere. Here, which is in Chantal Mouffe's work, the published so this is the whole. I didn't include that, but the whole political reading. There's no rationalized, fully explainable, shared, reasonable interest for all bodies that is equal for all bodies that participate. There is always some kind of strife. That doesn't mean it's unhealthy. That doesn't mean it cannot exist. That doesn't mean it's also not involved in its keeping up its own health. But that there is conflict of interest is not necessarily a problem. It means, that's what life is somehow. But that doesn't mean that you cannot erase it. I mean, the sooner you can erase it, you know that you've excluded certain bodies from having rights. So there's always, then let's say you've just moved the problem to outside of your own horizon. So, and that's also not, we know that's not going to work either. Yeah. So I'm not saying this is I'm not sure if it's a satisfying answer, but I don't think there's, let's say, fully realizable harmony on all scales for everybody all the time. I don't think that's a possibility. But there is so this is this, in other words, this is the question of ecological integrity. Like, how is it, what is an ecological integrity? What's an open-ended ecological integrity? It's always dynamic. There's no fixed state. There's no something that, so now we've achieved it, we can't move anymore because this is it. Like, ecosystems always evolve. And you could say, like, it's a problem that, let's say, from a, let's say, open woodland, which is the most kind of biodiverse ecosystems we have, to go to a fully fledged forest, actually is a reduction in the amount of species that live there. Like a peak end ecosystem has about, I don't know, 400 species, while open woodland has thousands. And and so is that a problem? Well, maybe. And does it mean we have to cut half the trees to, or I don't know. We don't have a fixed answer to this situation. It's always situated. It's always, of course, there should be peak ecosystems, but of course there also should be, or it's not even there should be, there are. It's like, yeah, that's what do you want? Like, yeah. There's no, we have to get rid of this kind of, there's no optimization here also. There's only endless change. But you can identify between the regenerative and the degenerative. You can identify whether, let's say, the fully fledged necrotic effect is you can spot it. And yeah, you need to get rid of that. Yeah. And then what's left over, we don't know yet. But we know that it will be able to sustain itself. Yeah.
Okay. There's open-endedness to it.
It's fundamentally open-ended, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'm just gonna...
There is a question from our online audience, so I will read it for you. Hold on. Oh, more questions coming up. So, besides human life rights with the European ESG directive and follow-up in the future, do you see this legislative pressure having the potential for adoption of these new avenues of communication in embracing, for instance, a board of advocate for the non-human and beyond? So, how could the avenues of non-human communication and insight be leveraged to make Dupont, for instance, understand, to respect the ecology of the Rhine in relation to its polluting practices?
Yeah, that's... I'm not sure if that can happen in a direct way, but I think this rights of nature movement is interesting, and it's really gaining foothold in Europe as well. Like Mar Menor is the first non-human legal body in Europe. This big saltwater basin in Spain, and actually D66 of all groups are preparing a law to make the Waddenzee a legal person, and so legal personhood. Let's say on its own is nothing if not implemented properly. And what it probably in the case of Mar Menor and also in the case of the Waddenzee, what it will add to existing regulations is that all these different things that happen now, that are all of them on their own, are within the law. This is how we got into trouble with the Waddenzee. There's all these little companies that have a little bit of right to fish or to delve some ores or to mine gas or to bagger for their ferries. All of them, they're on their own, calculated on their own. They are not harmful enough to forbid them. They're within the law, but together they should basically deteriorate the ecosystem. So the only way to do this is to also make something that unifies this. So legal personhood for the Waddenzee will provide exactly that and make all these things come together from the perspective of whatever that is, the Waddenzee. And of course, this is mediated by a lot of different people, but you can see that then suddenly the landscape shifts and another type of action is possible. So I'm not sure. So the downside of rights of nature, or let's say the constraint of rights of nature, is that it works on something that's already there. There needs to be a Waddenzee or a forest or a beautiful more than human body to protect. That's how it works. So that's also why we did a slightly different thing with zoöp. So basically, I said this in the break already, but any piece of biosphere or any space or any volume of a biosphere can become a zoöp, including a rotonde, a verkeersblad Vianen, or what have you. There's no problem. There's no limit. And on any space you can start this logic of ecological regeneration. This is not something that belongs to naturally functioning ecosystems already. So I think the Dupont question needs a bit of both. So yes, there are certain specific ecosystems that are directly harmed by the actions of Dupont. So then legal personhood for those ecosystems might kind of like constrain the actions of Dupont. But other than that, it's also, we have to kind of, this is not an easy, this is a really long struggle, but to get rid of this sustainability frame that is just about basically allowing the maximum possibility within the law and to, let's say, mitigate our bad behavior a little bit, as that's the kind of the best we can do. And this is a fundamental mentality shift that we hope to contribute with, but that is in its very early phases.
We have two more questions in the chat. Yeah. So the first one, can you see potential in experimenting with the more than human XR as a complement to the human capacity as a way of resonating with other than human bodies and support the shifting cosmology that is within the zoöp mentality as well? If so, how or where does the potential of these new technologies lie?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer, but I would be quite excited to find clever translations of, like, what's it like to have this chemical relation to your surrounding? Like, what is then meaningful, and how does that translate to a human meaningful signal? I mean, given the fact that XR usually works with sound and vision only, all smell is being developed, but I'm not sure if that works. You could think of haptic as well. I'm not sure if that's a good way to go. Again, I would bank on the imaginary capacity of the human neocortex rather than the technical tools. Let's say what is there as suspension of disbelief, but it's a creative challenge. I don't think there's a particular identified. I think it's really, this is artistic work. This is finding what is what triggers the imagination. What is the minimum signal that triggers the imagination? Not fill it in, not kind of fully explain and give it to you whole, but like it's much more kind of allow humans to step into a space that they've never been into, and rather than sending it, pumping it into their brains. It's more the other way around.
Mm-hmm. So not the technology, but the imagination.
Technology helps with the triggering. Right. But this would be my way to go about XR. Like, how can I use it to step into spaces that I've never been before, instead of pushing it in my brain. Which is, okay, I'm not saying you're doing this, but this is often how XR and VR are done. It's like fully encapsulate the human and then think that they will, that this is interesting. No, I don't think so.
All right, we have one more question. And then we do have another question here in the room as well, because we are a hybrid event. So, what strategies do you suggest for studying and engaging non-humans in a scientifically precise manner?
That's already a strategy.
So, within the current paradigm of science, where all variables need to be controlled for the sake of proper science, without necessarily constructing artificial spaces in labs.
So my question is the question how to do science?
So yes, so the question is, how do you suggest to study in a scientifically precise way?
Yeah, I think the question is how to do science. I'm not sure if that's for me to answer.
But then of course talking about the non-humans. How to study non-humans in a scientifically...
In a way, I think this was Latour that said that. Like, in a way, science is a way to make non-humans talk. It's carefully designing experiments to make sure that, okay, this is what they do in this circumstance. So I'm not sure if that's... how to do science is, I'm not sure if I can answer that. I have a remark. I like Donna Haraway's remark here. He said that a lot of scientific practice is based on this we all know. Like objectivity, meaning, let's say, an experiment should be able to be copied regardless of who does it. So basically there's no specific subjectivity on behalf of the experimenter that needs to be taken into account. So whatever is there that talks, it should talk the same way in the same thing regardless of situation or circumstances. So Donna Haraway called this the unmarked gaze. She says, okay, so there is actually a gaze that tells you that this is the standard of knowledge, but it's just not accounted for. It's just left outside of the picture. And it's this, the Western unified idea of rationality and single points of truth and fully calculable realities that are together make up nature. Ecology is about situations. And is about relations, and they always include different perspectives. So ecology is also a scientific practice, but it's a practice that marks more than one gaze. It marks it marks gazes, B, it marks more than one gaze. So I would advocate for a science that is not about a singular quantified idea of singular quantified standard of reality and truth, but a science that is open up to various standards, and that, in a way, I'm just translating the whole conversation here. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have an advice for you how to do science if you limit science to what's already kind of being done throughout the 20th century. Then I don't have an advice.
So I have a little bit of an extra. Okay. What I was asking is how to study non-humans in a non-artificially constructed lab.
In the field. Yeah, just go out. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on that note, we're going to go out into the room, and there is a question in the room.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit boring or practical question, but what's the difference between a zoop and a nature reserve? Or also, because you were talking about spreading, wouldn't it make sense that every nature reserve would become a body or would become part of zoops? And what's your approach?
Yeah. Any organization can become a zoop, and not just nature. And nature reserves tend to, there's a bit, this I got from Rosi Braidotti. There's a little bit of a suspect history to the nature reserve. It turns out the first major nature reserve in the world was Kruger Park in South Africa. And Kruger Park, when it was established, the first thing they did is kicked out the Zulus. So a nature reserve is our idea of the beautiful nature of South Africa. Of course, humans don't belong there, and certainly not black humans. So this is a problem within the general idea of nature, and the nature reserve in particular, is that it doesn't include humans. So zoops are about human inclusive ecosystems. So yes, but we provided that we learn how to become a useful species, to behave so that others can also behave, rather than be entitled to control all the others. So having said that, there's this book by Robert Fletcher and Bram. Robert Fletcher is the name to remember. The conservation revolution, and he talks about the paradigm of conviviality, so living together, basically. And I think that's the way to go with nature reserve, so that the ecological integrity of a nature reserve does not exclude humans, also doesn't mark itself on an idealized state of this is the fully fledged level of biodiversity and biomass, and anything else is a problem. No, it should be open-ended, it should be allowed to be dynamic, it should include humans. But then in a way, I think nature reserves are not the problem. I think cities and agricultural land are the problem. This is where the work needs to be done. So nature reserves are actually generally, well, I'm not saying there's no problems, but where we need to make a transition is in the agriculture. That's where the big change will happen. And then,
Thanks.
I hope it will happen. Put it this. Let me be cautious here. I'm not sure if it will. Yeah.
We might have time for one more question. Maybe someone in our chat.
Personal, correct.
I'm curious, like, because you started this, right? The zoöp, it also it stems from you and probably people around you or non-humans around you.
Yeah.
Well, how did that interest you? Like, how did this idea come to you? What is your personal relationship to it?
Well, it's not as always. It's not this one moment of like, okay, I'm going to start the zoöp and it's going to look like this. No, it started with. This is actually a very nice and very long and winding story, but it started with an exhibition that I made with a group of people, Dissident Gardens, and I did a part in it which was about the idea of terraforming. The exhibition was called Gardening Mars. It was about the cultural performance of the idea of terraforming, which fundamentally is a very colonial idea. It's also... It thinks of ecosystems as human support systems and not as ecosystems. So there's a lot of problems with it. But the interesting bit of it is that in this idea of terraforming is the possibility of regeneration. So basically the idea of terraforming follows that if it's fully speculative, it hasn't happened. So it's not a real thing, or not yet a real thing, it's just a theory. But the idea is that if you follow... From the Himalayas, you go down. The first living species you meet would also be the first species that you would, let's say, spread on another planetary body. And then you would go down with once the conditions of life have been successfully created by this first species, then the conditions for a next range of species are emerging. So the idea is that to follow the logic of the pioneering species and how life creates the space for more life and for more life, and then at the end it becomes okay for humans. So that's one idea. And the other idea was the rights of nature, so the case of Wanganui River, that I only really started to look into in 2018. But then parallel to this was the time of Gardening Mars, and then I set up a series of workshops which were called Terraforming Earth, and they took the legal idea of rights of nature and the idea of regeneration as it kind of is practiced or theorized in terraforming and say, what can we do with this? And this led to an idea which a few months later became, then I came up with this, first it was called bio-co-op. It was, but bio-co-op sounds a little bit like the cooperative farms of the 70s, so we didn't, but it was a short story about a baker and his yeast. So we form a bio-co-op. This was a short sci-fi story written by, what's his name? Ruderol. I can give you his real name in a bit. But I think, bio-co-op, that we all got very excited about the idea of forming a kind of, in a way, a legal contract or a kind of bond, let's say, and a fully established kind of cooperative situation. And then said, but bio-co-op is not going to cut it. And then I came up with this word zoöp. And then, the next series of workshops were figuring out what is then a zoöp. Like we knew that we were onto something, but then it had to be developed. Yeah, there's the origin story of zoöp.
Well, Klaas, thank you very much for your inspiring talk and also for answering all our questions. This concludes our first XR lunch, number 1. I would like to also thank the audience that attended online. They were with a lot today.
Oh,
so that was great.
Yeah.
I would like to thank the artists who just kickstarted the residency Realities in Transition at V2. And I would like to thank all the people who helped out, Sebastian, Werner, Charles, Wilco, to make this event as smooth as it goes.
As it was.
So, thank you all, and see you next time.
Thank you.